Hello, today we're going to talk about server controls and event-driven programming.
So event-driven programming is really the flow of the program is determined by the actions that the user takes on the page, whether they click a button, pull down a drop-down list, drag something into a shopping cart. Those are all actions that the user takes, and every time one of those events transpires, the system needs to know about it, needs to do something about it. So in basics, we're talking about detection, the sort of what was done, and then what to do about it. That's called event handling. The server controls are really the secret behind event-driven programming in ASP.NET. These controls, like buttons, allow our user to interact with our pages, and they allow our developers to program event handling methods in the background. So what happens when that button is clicked? Server controls, they live in our toolbox, our standard toolbox in Visual Studio. You drag them over to your page, you double-click on them to get to the code behind. Those objects are normally visual. They can create and receive events, and they can also just display data. Common controls are going to be your buttons, hyperlinks, images, drop-down lists, etc. Less common controls are going to be your add rotator panel, placeholder. We won't use those.
A little bit about server controls. We're familiar with manipulating server controls in the properties grid. Some common properties are ID and font and back color and forecolor. And something to note is that text and ID, while they basically say the same thing, by default, they are not the same. The ID is literally the ID of the control. It's a unique ID. Every control needs to have its own. The program, or Visual Studio, the IDE, really takes care of the unique naming for you. If you change this, be careful because it's what you need to keep in mind when you're programming against what the actual name is, and it is case sensitive. The text you can change to anything. That's up to you. Some other properties, some common properties, things like height and width. These are visual objects, so they have visual dimensions. Whether they're visible, if you want to hide something, you can use the visible property. Now, to get to the code behind, to get to handle the event, to detect the event, we first start with our server object, or in this case, a button. Put that on the page, and then you just double click the button to get to that code behind. And as you can see, the code is created for you automatically. The event handler method is really what it's called. And in this case, we're dealing with the click of a button. And this button happens to be called button 1 because that's what the IDE called it by default. So we just leave it that way. And then we write our code in these curly braces. Once we start typing what we want to happen, in this case, we want to do something with image 1, which happens to be another object in the page that we're dealing with. We just type image 1, and the look ahead, the IntelliSense in Visual Studio will kind of guide us in the right direction. So as we type out the IMA in image 1, for instance, we'll see any object that starts with an IMA. So image 1 is there. You can select it and hit enter. You can type it out all the way if you want. It's there to help. You'll get used to it. It's pretty handy. If you ever get lost, just start typing something, and it's trying to read your mind a little bit. Once you get the object typed in, you can expose the methods and properties by typing a dot. And then to really add the programming, you just completely type out.
So in this example, we have an image called image 1, a text box called text box 1, text box called text box 2, and a button. As you remember from before, to get to the code behind, we double click on the button, and that takes us to the button 1 click event handler. And inside these curly braces, we write this code. And the code here is the object that we want to change, so it's the object name, followed by a dot, followed by the property of that object that we want to change, followed by the assignment operator, which is the equal sign. And then on the right side, we want to run a convert of whatever is in the text box, which is coming in as text or a string. And we need to get that into a numeric value so it can fit into the data type that the height and width properties are expecting. So we run a convert dot to int16, and that is going to change whatever's in that text box into an integer and assign it to the height. Same thing happens on the width side down here. So that's just the object.property that we want to change, that we want to convert, and every command in C# ends in a semicolon. Now go ahead and give it a try yourself.
So in this example, I'm going to go ahead and pull up my website. We're going to add a new web form. Select the master page, visit our design surface, and here we want to add one button, an image. I kind of want that image first. Two text boxes, which will be used to hold the new height and width of our image. Put a space. Now, if you end up in a situation where you're highlighted on a server control and you want to maybe add some space between the previous server control and this one, you can hit the left arrow, which will put your cursor in between the two, and then just hit a couple space bars to give you a little bit more space. Just makes it a little bit better looking. So part of the exercise is to apply an image URL, and I have one here, a nice picture of Altgeld Hall. I'll use that URL in the image URL field, paste that. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and save that. Now, the objective here is to change the image shape, the image dimensions, based on what the user inputs in the height and width text boxes here. So as you remember from the demonstrations, we can double click on the button, and that's going to take us to this code behind, which is going to be the event handler for clicking on that button. The button happens to be called button 1 because I never changed it. And from here, this is where we want to manipulate the object that's on our page. So we happen to know that we added an image. It's called image 1. To get to the properties, we press dot, and the property we want to change first is height. You can just hit the space bar to autocomplete. We want to change that to something over here, and we're going to have to convert to int. And like I said, we can go to many types of ints. 16 should be good enough for us. Whatever is in the text box, 1.text. And like you know, every command in C# has to end in a semicolon, so we enter that. I think that's even particular with the case. So here we go. That's for the height. Very similar sequence for the width, except here we type in the width and we say equal convert dot to int whatever is in this time text box to dot text, and end with a semicolon, and save that. Go back to our design page here, and we run this. We can run it locally here in Chrome without having to publish the results to the web server. Takes a little time. What this is doing is starting a local host version of IIS, a web server, basically on your computer. So here we can type in new dimensions. Let's try 300 by 300 button. There we go. Resize. How about something even smaller? 100 by 100. There we go. Let's get that nice and big. Go Huskies. I'll
just hit enter that time and we get a nice big image there. So there you have it. We've demonstrated how to change the image size based on the input that's in two text boxes. So the next concept we want to talk about is page load, and this is literally what happens when your page loads. When the user comes to your page, what do you want to happen? So this is kind of handled like many of the other server controls. There's event detection and event handling, and the event that's happening is the page load. And the handling is accessed inside of the page load event, which to get to that as a developer, you just double click on a blank part of your page here, and it takes you to this page load event handler. So you write your code in here, and it executes when the page loads. So the next concept we're going to talk about is postback, and that is a transaction between your web page and the web server when you want a control on your page to check back with the web server and the web server to know that something is updated. For instance, if a drop-down list has changed items, a radio button list, if a button was clicked. A lot of times when a server control is pressed or there's been an event on a server control, most of the time the postback happens in the background without any developer having to do anything to accommodate that. There is one type of server control that doesn't do an auto postback, and that's those are called list objects. Those will be radio button list, checkbox lists, and drop-down lists, one that we use frequently. So when we're wanting our drop-down list to check back with the server, to tell the server that something has changed, then we need to enable auto postback in this menu that comes when we select what's called the flyout glyph, this little box with a left arrow in it that's connected to our drop-down list object. So click that, enable auto postback, and that means every time that the user selects a different item in our drop-down list, the page will check back with the server, and if there's any event to be processed, any event detected, like a drop-down list change, and there's something that needs to happen, any code that needs to execute, that'll happen only if we select enable auto postback. So another important thing we want our users to be able to do is navigate from one page to another. And sometimes they can click on a hyperlink, and a hyperlink is going to have a property called navigate URL. And sometimes we are not going to have that hyperlink, but we're going to have to programmatically change from one page to another. Like if a user checks out and we want them to go to a confirmation page or something to that nature. So a way we accommodate that is with this response.redirect command, and that's going to help us change from one page to another page. And that's pretty simple, response.redirect, and then in parentheses we want to have the URL of the page that the user is trying to visit. You can use, in this case, a relative URL, so that means wherever I'm at, just take me to the about.aspx page, like in this example. So that only works if your about page is in the same web server folder that your user is currently on. If you want, for instance, your user to traverse out to another website completely, you're going to have to fully qualify that website name. So that just means that you're going to need the HTTP : and the whole URL name for that to happen. And like any other C# command, you end with a semicolon. Let's take a quick look at what's in our drop-down list configuration. And this is the same type of configuration as you're going to see in radio button lists or checkbox lists. So when you add a drop-down list and you select on that flyout GIF that I demonstrated earlier, you'll have this edit items selection. You want to go into edit items, or you can do it from properties, but edit items is going to allow you to add as many items as you want to that drop-down list. So when the user selects the drop-down list and they see the choices, those are called items, And to add those choices or items, you just hit add as many times as you need to in this box. Notice that it uses ordinal numbering, means it starts with 0 basically. So in this case, I have 3 items, but the third one is actually item number 2 because it starts with 0, 1, 2. If you select on any of those items, you'll see the properties on the right-hand side, and there are a couple ones to note. First, text is what the user sees, and then value by default is the same as text, but the developer might want a different value inside of that item so that they can get to that property at runtime. So you can use something like you might have like a numeric value inside of there that you want to access, the developer wants to access to run some sort of business logic on. The point being that text is what the user sees in the drop-down list, and value is another thing that the developer can access. And then if you want that a certain object selected or a certain item selected when the page loads, then you want to set that property to true, and just keep in mind that only one item can be set to true, to selected true for any one list item. So if you select multiple as true, at design time it won't error, but when you run it will error because you can truly only have one object selected at a time. Now it's your turn.
So let's go ahead and try it ourselves. First, I'm going to add a new page. I'll call that Demo C. Select the master page, visit my design view, and here, following the instructions, I think what I want to do first is add a drop-down list and add an image. That drop-down list right below the image. Now it says I want to populate the drop-down list with image URL values. So here I'm going to edit the items and add let's just start with 3 here. Add these items. I can change the name of them to image 1. Well, image 1, image 2, and image 3. And let's see, let's go to the web and get some images. It's getting towards dinner time. I'm getting a little hungry, so let's see what we have for hamburgers. Go to Bing Images this time, and okay, let's find some nice images here. That one looks super tasty. Let's grab this image address, pop it into image 1. For the value, this is where we're putting the image URL. And here I'll just go, just call it HB1 as hamburger 1. And let's, this time let's look at some fries. All right, this plate of fries looks pretty tantalizing. I do like me some McDonald's fries though. Let's copy the image URL, image address, pop that into the value for the second item. And we're going to call this fries. And why not call this one a shake? And go out and find a tantalizing picture of a milkshake. Oh, well, this one certainly looks classic. Copy image address, paste that into the value for my shake. Okay, and by default, we are going to say the hamburger is selected. I'm going to set that to true. Say okay here. And then remember that auto post back. We want to enable that here. Let's save this. Now, right now, we don't really have any code. There's nothing that's going to happen when the user selects hamburger 1 or fries or anything like that until we add that. So to get to the code behind,
we have to double click on the drop-down list and add the code. So here we know what we want to do is change the image, so image1 dot image URL, no, not image, align image URL equal to the selected item in the drop-down list. So we start with the object first. Always start with the object first, and selected item is the property we want to access, and then we want to get the value, not the text, but the value, and then a semicolon. Okay, save that, go back to our code here, and let's execute this. So our goal here is to have the image change to whatever's selected in the drop-down list. I expect that when this page loads, there will not be an image displayed until we change the drop-down list. And that's because I never set an initial image. Here's my fries. Now if I go back to hamburger, I should see that, and my shake. Ooh, very big shake. Wow, super, super big. Okay, now one thing I want to fix here is, first of all, I want the image to be something that stays on the screen. So I'm gonna go and change the height and width properties right here to something a little more friendly. 500, sure, that looks okay. Now one more thing, I want something to just be displayed when the user loads the page. So here I want to get to the page behind. Remember, you just double click on an empty space. Yeah. Okay, I had to double click up on the nav bar to get me there. But here basically I'm in the page load. And so what I want to do at the page load is set image1 image URL to equal, well, the drop-down list selected item is okay too. Selected item dot value semicolon. Save that. Let's run that again. Now when the page loads, I should see my hamburger. This is about the slowest thing with Visual Studio, waiting for this web server to start up on your machine. It's almost faster just to publish your changes to the web server and visit from there, which I might start doing. Let's try this again. Stop. Boy, that really got hung up. Try to launch this again. Oh, this time it runs nice and fast. So there's our hamburger, and it's displaying at a much friendlier image size. So there we go.
So the next concept I want to cover is the concept of session variables. Session variables are the way that ASP.NET deals with session state. So if you recall from our lecture, HTTP is a stateless protocol, meaning that each trip to the web server typically sees that as a unique trip. So we have to use this concept of sessions, where you think about visiting a site from a browser, and the web server has to see that your activity navigating through that site is supposed to be a fluid session. So that has to take place on the web server, the way that's managed. But as a developer, we can use these tricks called session variables to help us give that fluid experience to the user. And the way to create session variables is pretty straightforward. Basically, you start with the word session. You give a name as really a string, and this name can be really anything you want it to be. You put it in quotations, and then you set it to whatever you want it to be. It could be a static thing that you set one time, like a number, or a counting date or something like that. You could set it one time, or you could set it to be dynamic, meaning it takes information from the web page. So whatever the user entered in their first name box, that could be set, for instance, like this, to a first name session variable. Now, looking at how that looks, let's say we have two pages here, sessiondemo1.aspx and sessiondemo2.aspx. When this button is clicked in the first page, what I want to happen, or what the developer wants to happen, is to set some session variable called random text equal to whatever's typed into text box 1. And then, like we learned about response redirect, this command, response.redirect, takes the user to the second page, sessiondemo2.aspx. We see the code down here. When the page loads, then there is a label on the page that will change its text to whatever was passed into the session variable. So whatever random text the user entered on page 1 will be displayed on page 2 at page load. And that needs to be converted to a string just to make it compatible with what a label expects. All right, let's take a look ourselves. In this demo, we're going to play with page load, response.redirect, and session variables. We're going to add two web forms, add one button, and a text box to the first form, add a label to form number 2. And then we're going to add code to pass what's in the text box to display in page 2 on page load. So let's get started with that. So our first step is to create two brand new web forms. I'll call these demo form 1 and demo form 2. Back on demo form 1, I want to add a button and two text boxes. So start with a button, drag over a text box, and another text box. Let's make that look a little bit nicer. And on form 2, I want a label. So let's go to form 2, add a label. Okay, and I want to make that label nice and big so I can see it right when I land on it. Okay, so add the code to pass text box content to display in page 2. Okay, this is a little tricky. So we double click on the button to get to the code behind. And what I want to do is set a session variable here. So if you remember I don't want anything on page load. What I want is something in the button click event. Here, I want to set the session variable. So you remember we just type in session with the square brace and then something in a quotation mark. So let's just say text box content equal to what's in text box 1 dot text semicolon. Now I realize I mistakenly added two text boxes. I really only needed one. So that's enough to set the session variable to whatever is in the text box dot text field when the button's clicked. But we really want to
get to page 2. So if you remember, the way to do that is with the response.redirect to a local page called demo form 2.aspx. We set that up when we set this one up, semicolon. Okay. I don't think we need an equal here. Sorry, my bad. So response.redirect, and then the page we want to go to, in quotation marks, followed by a semicolon. All right, so that alone is going to set a session variable when the button's clicked and redirect the user to a new form. But nothing will display in that new form in this label until we go to the code behind. So the code behind in the page load should read something like label 1.text equals what? Session text box contents, I believe, semicolon, but that might not be enough. Text box content. Now it's important to note we won't get an error if we misspell something in here. We will simply just not get our results. Here we need to do a convert to string to make sure that the text the label is getting a string format. And I could spell string right, and there, all our squigglies are gone. So take a look at that. Label 1.text equals convert.toString left paren sessions left bracket quote text box content semicolon. Save that. I'm going to save this. Basically, I'm going to save anything with a little star on it. I'm going to go ahead and delete text box 2 because I just didn't need that. And I'm going to have to go ahead and just run this. Okay, loaded up much faster this time. So here, oh, nothing happens. Why that? You know, I didn't have anything in here. So I say hello page 2 button. Hello page 2. Awesome. And notice we're on the form 2 that we created. So that's a way to pass variables from one page to another and provide the user that seamless experience they might expect on your web application. And finally, just one little note about debugging. Anytime you see those little red squiggly lines under your code, that means there's something wrong. Sometimes it's an easy issue. You hover over it and you see what the problem is. And in this case, in this example, my text box doesn't have the name that my code is expecting. So I might have to troubleshoot there and go look at the ID of my text box, make sure it matches up letter for letter with what I'm coding against. In this case, I have a little squiggly line under my last curly bracket. That might mean I have one too many curly brackets or one too little. So that's it for today. Hope you enjoy.